The rain poured heavily on the lonely village road. In the dim light of a flickering street lamp, a poor mechanic bent down beside a broken truck. His worn-out clothes were soaked, mud clung to his boots, and his hands were covered in grease as he tightened the last bolt with all his strength. His face was tired, yet determined, because fixing trucks wasn't just his work, it was his lifeline. Every coin he earned went to feeding his family, keeping the small roof over their heads, and dreaming of a better tomorrow. But tonight felt heavier. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe the strange feeling in his chest, that something bigger than this broken truck was waiting for him in the dark. The mechanic finally dragged himself home, rainwater dripping from his hair and sleeves. His small, dimly lit house smelled of damp wood and smoke from a dying fire. At the center, his wife sat at the old wooden table, tears rolling down her cheeks, clutching a crumpled note in trembling hands. His mother stood frozen near the wall, her face pale with shock. Their little child sat silently in the corner, eyes wide, too young to understand everything but old enough to feel the tension in the room. An angry man stood towering over them, his voice sharp and merciless. Every word he shouted cut through the silence like thunder, blaming, accusing, threatening. The mechanic stepped inside, dripping wet, his tired body aching, but the scene before him made his heart ache even more. Something terrible had happened, something far beyond the broken trucks and long hours of work. That night, as the storm outside refused to calm, a sudden knock echoed on the wooden door. Everyone inside froze. The mechanic's wife wiped her tears quickly, the child clutched his grandmother's hand, and the angry man fell silent. When the door creaked open, a well-dressed stranger stood at the threshold. His polished shoes and expensive coat seemed out of place in their poor village home. The dim lantern light reflected on his sharp features, making his presence even more unsettling. The wife's eyes widened in surprise, as though she recognized something familiar in the man. The mechanic father, still damp from the rain, felt his chest tighten with unease. He didn't trust outsiders, especially ones who looked like they belonged to another world entirely. The husband's jaw clenched in anger, suspicion boiling in his eyes. Who was this man? Why had he come here, at such an hour, carrying secrets in his silence? The stranger stepped forward, his voice calm but heavy. I bring news that will change everything. The living room felt like a battlefield. The husband's voice roared, echoing through the small house as he shouted at his wife, his words dripping with fury and insult. His fists clenched, his face red with anger, while the fragile lamplight flickered against the cracked walls. The stranger leaned closer to the trembling wife, whispering words only she could hear. Her eyes widened at each secret revealed, tears spilling faster down her cheeks, torn between fear and disbelief. The sound of glass shattering on the floor cut through the chaos. Her shaking hands had knocked over a cup, the shards scattering like broken pieces of her life. The mother pulled the child into her arms, shielding their little eyes from the storm of rage inside the room. Fear gripped her heart, but she stayed silent, praying this night would pass without further destruction. Meanwhile, just outside, the poor mechanic father sat alone on a broken stool, a cigarette burning slowly between his fingers. He stared into the rain-soaked darkness, smoke curling upward into the night sky. His silence wasn't weakness, it was the weight of a man who carried the pain of everyone inside but had no strength left to fight. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, its heavy wooden benches filled with curious onlookers. At the front, the stern judge sat high on the bench, gavel resting beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The mechanic's wife sat near the front, tears streaking her face, clutching the edge of the lawyer's table for strength. Her lawyer spoke firmly, every word echoing like a blade cutting through lies. The husband sat across from her, nervous, his hands fidgeting, sweat glistening on his brow. The man who once shouted so confidently at home now shifted uneasily under the weight of truth pressing down on him. At the very back of the courtroom, the mechanic father sat in silence, his tired eyes fixed on the proceedings. He didn't speak, but his presence was heavy, a symbol of quiet endurance. The stranger stood tall in the witness box, his voice calm and clear as he gave his testimony. Every revelation he made sent ripples through the courtroom, exposing secrets the husband had tried so hard to bury. The air was thick with tension, the kind that could break lives or deliver long-awaited justice. The city streets shimmered with neon lights, rain still glistening on the asphalt like broken glass. Amid the glow of flickering signs and the hum of late-night traffic, the wife stood firm, her eyes burning with a newfound courage. Before her, the husband froze, shock written across his face. He had always seen her as fragile, someone he could control, but tonight she stood taller than ever, unshaken by his anger or threats. Beside her, the well-dressed stranger stepped forward, holding a thick folder of secret documents, the very evidence that could dismantle the husband's lies once and for all. The papers rustled in the night breeze, their weight heavier than chains. From the shadows of a narrow alley, the mechanic father watched silently. His worn face remained unreadable, but his eyes followed every move. He was no longer just the poor man fixing trucks, he had become a quiet guardian of truth, standing behind his family even from the darkness. The husband's skin turned pale, fear hollowing his features. For the first time, he realized his power was slipping away, and nothing he said could stop what was coming. The courtroom fell into tense silence as the judge raised his gavel high. With a sharp crack that echoed against the walls, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. Gasps swept through the crowded room. The corrupt husband's face drained of all color, his confident mask shattering in an instant. Guards moved swiftly to his side, their heavy hands gripping his arms as he struggled in disbelief, his protests drowned out by the voice of justice. At the lawyer's table, the mechanic's wife stood tall. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were not of sorrow, they were tears of victory, of strength reclaimed after years of fear. She pressed her hand to her heart, breathing deeply as the weight of suffering finally lifted. The stranger stepped forward one last time, holding up the final piece of evidence, the document that sealed the husband's fate. His calm, steady voice had guided the truth into the light, and now it shone brighter than ever. At the back of the courtroom, the poor mechanic father pulled his child into his arms, hugging tightly, his eyes closing with relief. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe freely. Justice had spoken. The family's dignity was restored, and the man who had caused them so much pain was led away, powerless at last.